The flash message arrived at 1712 hours local time, and it said, in the precise language of classified naval communications, that the United States Navy had just been cut off from a decade's worth of cooperative intelligence in the most strategically consequential drug interdiction corridor on Earth. The USS Delgado DDG-112, an Arleigh Burke-class Flight 2, a destroyer running a counter-narcotics patrol in the Central Caribbean, received the notification in its Combat Information Center. The tactical action officer read it twice. Intelligence sharing suspended. All joint operations terminated. The bilateral intelligence framework built over 12 years of coordinated operations with Colombia's maritime security apparatus, the network of coastal sensors, informant networks, and real-time track data that told the U.S. Navy which vessels to watch, which corridors the Gulf Clan was running, and where the deep-water submersibles were being staged, had been switched off by presidential order in Bogota, effective immediately. The operational consequence was not subtle. The Gulf Clan, formerly the Clan del Golfo, a narco-terrorist syndicate generating somewhere between $3 and $5 billion annually from cocaine exports, had been waiting for exactly this kind of window. Their intelligence was better than most people outside the military community appreciate. They knew the cooperation had been suspended before the Delgado's crew did. 170 seconds after the flash message was acknowledged, the Delgado's AN/SPY-1DV radar returned to contact. The contact was small, a radar return so marginal it barely crossed the automated classification threshold. A low-profile submersible, traveling at 14 knots on a southwest heading, running with approximately 6 inches of freeboard above the waterline. The design philosophy of these vessels is directly inverse to the MiG-31 or the Yasin M. Rather than representing a technological peak, they represent a deliberate technological regression toward near invisibility. Constructed from layered fiberglass and carbon composite in clandestine jungle boatyards, powered by quiet marine diesel engines, shaped to minimize both radar cross-section and surface wake, they carry no electronic navigation systems that emit detectable signals and produce no acoustic signature that passive naval sonar can reliably resolve at distance. This particular configuration, the type U.S. interdiction forces designate a low-profile submersible, or LPS, costs approximately $2 million to build. The cargo it was carrying had a conservative street value of $300 million. The Gulf Clan's strategic read of the situation was that the intelligence suspension had blinded the destroyer. Without Colombian human intelligence feeding real-time track data through the Joint Interagency Task Force South Network, the U.S. Navy would be operating on organic sensors alone, in a maritime environment where organic sensors have well-documented limitations against targets specifically engineered to defeat them. The LPS was already running. The window was open. The read was wrong. The Delgado's tactical action officer had 12 minutes and 30 seconds before the LPS reached the deep-water thermocline layer, where its already marginal heat signature would become undetectable by airborne infrared sensors. The thermocline is the smuggler's version of a tree line. Once they reach it, the geometry of interception changes dramatically in their favor. 12 minutes and 30 seconds is not a long decision window. It was enough. The first asset repositioned was a P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft operating out of a U.S. installation on Curaçao, already airborne on its assigned sector surveillance track 40 nautical miles to the northeast. The P-8A carries the AN/APY-10 multi-mode radar, a system whose detection modes include specific configurations optimized for resolving the Kelvin wake, the subtle subsurface pressure disturbance created by a vessel moving through water, which persists and remains detectable even when the vessel itself presents insufficient radar cross-section for direct detection. The LPS was producing a Kelvin wake. The APY-10 found it inside 90 seconds of being vectored onto the search area. The second asset was an MQ-9B Sea Guardian unmanned aerial vehicle already holding a 25,000-foot orbit 15 nautical miles west of the contact's projected track. The Sea Guardian is the naval variant of the Reaper platform, modified specifically for maritime surveillance, and its most relevant capability for this engagement was the Gorgon Stare electro-optical/infrared sensor package, a wide-area persistent surveillance system capable of maintaining a targeting quality infrared track on a boat-sized surface contact from altitudes where the aircraft is acoustically and optically invisible from the surface. The LPS's diesel exhaust plume, faint as it was at operating power settings, was a thermal contrast against the surface water temperature that the Gorgon Stare resolved and locked within the first minute of its sensor slew. At this point, the tactical picture assembled on the Delgado's Aegis combat system via the Link 16 data network had 3 independent sensor tracks on the same contact. The SPY-1D surface radar return, the P-8A's Kelvin wake detection, and the Sea Guardian's infrared track. 3 sensors, 3 physical phenomena, 1 target. The fusion algorithm had assigned the contact a 97% classification confidence as an LPS vessel consistent with Gulf Clan operational profiles. No fishing vessel, no pleasure craft, no commercial traffic. 1 low-profile submersible running at maximum sustainable speed toward deep water with 10 tons of cocaine in its cargo hold. Here is the specific problem that remained. The LPS was at 15.2 nautical miles from the Delgado. That range is outside effective small boat interception geometry at the contact's current speed and heading. A rigid hull inflatable boat deployed from the destroyer would not close the distance before the LPS reached the thermocline. A standard anti-ship missile is categorically inappropriate against a semi-submerged fiberglass vessel. The warhead and guidance system represent a cost ratio of several hundred to 1 against the target, and the lethality profile is excessive for what amounts to a counter-narcotics interdiction. A helicopter deployment was available, but would put crew in proximity to a vessel whose operators had a documented history of using violence to prevent boarding. The Delgado's 5-inch/62 caliber Mark 45 Model 4 naval gun had been digitally integrated into the Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter air architecture in a surface-to-surface application that most people associate only with air defense, using external sensor platforms as over-the-horizon targeting nodes to extend the gun's effective engagement range far beyond what its own fire control radar can support. The P-8A and the Sea Guardian were not just surveillance assets in this engagement. They were the gun's eyes at 15 miles. The extended range-guided munition is a GPS-guided 5-inch projectile. It is not a missile. It has no propulsion beyond the initial powder charge. It is an artillery round with a GPS guidance package in its nose that corrects its trajectory during the ballistic arc based on continuously updated target position data fed from the network. Its precision at maximum range is measured in meters. Against a 40-foot fiberglass vessel riding 6 inches above the waterline, meters is sufficient. At 17:47 hours, the Mk-45 fired once. The round was in the air for 58 seconds. During those 58 seconds, the Sea Guardian's Gorgon stare maintained continuous infrared lock on the LPS and streamed updated position data through the Link 16 network to the round's guidance package, correcting for the target's continued movement along its southwest heading. The physics of this process, a GPS-guided projectile receiving real-time targeting corrections from a UAV sensor during its ballistic flight, represent a capability that did not exist as a deployed operational system 15 years ago. It exists now. At 174,808, the round impacted the LPS's forward deck structure, just aft of the low wheelhouse fairing. A 5-inch naval round carries approximately 7 kilograms of high explosive. Against a fiberglass hull with no structural armor and fuel tanks running through its keel, that detonation is not contained. The primary explosion ruptured the main fuel tank. The secondary fire from the diesel ignition spread through the cargo compartment within 30 seconds. The LPS lost all forward way immediately and began settling by the bow. 4 minutes and 20 seconds after impact, the vessel had descended below the surface. The 14 knots of transit speed that had been carrying $300 million worth of narcotics toward the thermocline had stopped permanently at 15.2 nautical miles from a U.S. Navy destroyer that never closed to within visual range of its target. The Delgado deployed its rigid hull inflatable boats immediately after the impact confirmation. The response team, U.S. Navy personnel, and an embarked U.S. Coast Guard detachment operating under Federal Drug Enforcement Authority reached the debris field before the last structural sections of the LPS submerged. What they recovered in the following 90 minutes was carefully documented before the ocean claimed the rest. The recovered material included sealed packages of compressed cocaine with a total weight later confirmed at 9.8 metric tons, each block stamped with the Gulf Clan's distinctive crown and rifle marking, the same logo that appears on their social media propaganda and their products seized in European port inspections. Satellite communication equipment, 2 iridium-capable transceivers with encryption modules attached, the type used for real-time route coordination with shore-based handlers. 4 mobile phones with SIM cards that would later yield contact data of operational intelligence value. A waterproof navigation tablet with route waypoints loaded. no fishing equipment, no civilian identification documents, no evidence of any function other than the transport of narcotics by professional criminal operators. The Pentagon released the unedited Gorgon Stare infrared footage and the P-8A's synthetic aperture radar track imagery within 12 hours. The footage showed the contact from first detection through impact and sinking, continuous and uninterrupted, with the sensor timestamp visible throughout. The Gulf Clan's talking point framework, that U.S. interdiction operations were targeting fishermen, that the Navy was operating without sufficient target discrimination, could not be sustained against footage that showed every second of the engagement from 25,000 feet. The Colombian government's decision to suspend intelligence cooperation had been premised on a specific assumption: that U.S. technological capability in the Caribbean was dependent on Colombian human intelligence as its essential foundation, and that removing that foundation would effectively ground the interdiction mission. The engagement on the afternoon of the Delgado's isolation demonstrated that this assumption was architecturally incorrect. The kill chain that executed the LPS interdiction used zero Colombian intelligence. It used a shipboard radar, a maritime patrol aircraft out of a U.S. installation, an unmanned surveillance vehicle, a GPS-guided gun round, and a data network that fused all of them into a single fire control picture in real time. Every asset in that chain was sovereign U.S. military capability, operating entirely within its own sensor and communications architecture, requiring no host nation intelligence input at any point from target detection to engagement completion. This does not mean that intelligence cooperation is valueless. It means something more specific. The cooperation provided by Colombia's Joint Intelligence Network was highly valuable for the proactive identification of staging areas, trafficking routes, and vessel construction sites before a vessel was underway. Losing that cooperation increased the operational workload of organic sensors and reduced the early warning window available before a vessel reached deep water. The Gulf Clan would gain some successful transits during the period of reduced cooperation that they would not have achieved otherwise. What they would not gain was the ability to operate in the open ocean with impunity. The Delgado's engagement demonstrated that the terminal interdiction capability, the ability to detect, track, classify, and destroy a target once it was running, was intact and independent. The intelligence suspension gave the cartel a longer runway before contact. It did not change what happened when contact was made. By the time the Delgado's after-action report reached JATF South that evening, the intelligence value of the recovered communication equipment was already being exploited. The contact network extracted from the encrypted Iridium transceivers was generating actionable leads on shore-based coordination infrastructure in 3 separate countries. The round that hit the LPS at 15.2 nautical miles had cost the Gulf Clan 1 vessel, 1 crew, and $300 million in product. The intelligence it produced would cost them considerably more over the following months. The Caribbean remains the primary transit corridor for cocaine, moving from South American production zones to North American and European markets. The volume moving through that corridor annually is measured in hundreds of tons. No single interdiction, regardless of how precisely executed, changes that fundamental math. What changes the math is the sustained presence of a sensor and interdiction architecture that makes every transit a risk calculation rather than a routine operation, that forces the Gulf Clan to spend money on vessels it will lose, on routes that will be compromised, on personnel who will be detained, on communications equipment that will end up in exploitation facilities. The Delgado's engagement on that afternoon was one data point in that sustained pressure campaign. It was an effective one. The question this operation raises for anyone thinking seriously about the future of this fight: the LPS design philosophy, minimal radar cross-section, Kelvin wake suppression, low thermal output, is being continuously refined. The generation of submersibles being built now are more capable than the one the Delgado engaged. At what point does the Kelvin wake detection methodology lose reliable effectiveness against a vessel specifically engineered to minimize subsurface pressure disturbance? And when that threshold is crossed, what replaces it as the primary detection method? And is that method currently deployed at sufficient scale in the Caribbean corridor to maintain the interdiction rate that makes the risk calculation meaningful for the cartel? Leave your assessment below.